as long as people are armed with the right facts and the right arguments, I just don't think there's any way the cultural revolutionaries can win. I don't know about you, but I'm not spending the rest of my life cringing and being told that I'm guilty of things I never did. Not doing it, not guilty.
Hello and welcome to Offscript. My name is Stephen Edgington. In recent years, it has become clear that there is a war going on, a war on the West. This is the opening line to a new book describing the ongoing culture wars as an attack on Western civilization. To discuss his new book, The War on the West, Douglas Murray joins me now. Thank you so much, Douglas, for joining us. What is the War on the West?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be with you. The War on the West is a culmination of some books I've been writing in recent years and describes what I think is the underlying story, one of the big underlying stories that's going on in our time, which is a war on the West, by the West, from the West itself. There are different forms of anti-Westernism that exist in the world. There's Chinese anti-Westernism, Arab anti-Westernism, there's Russian anti-Westernism. I'm interested in Western anti-Westernism. That is, the movements within the West, within the mainly English-speaking democracies, but Europe as well, which basically attempt to destroy everything in our own past, ransack our culture, our history, and much more, and basically deplete ourselves of everything that we've inherited, look at it all through a very monomaniacal lens of racism, oppression, slavery, colonialism, and come out with a decision that there's basically nothing good to be said about us. This is a war on all of the fundamentals of the West, but I can't stress enough, this is specifically waged within the West against the West, and that is, I would suggest, very uncommon. There are movements, doubtless, around the world that replicate this to some extent, but none really quite like it. I don't think there's any significant movement within countries in Africa that try to rob African countries of their histories. I don't think there's significant movements in China or the Far East that would try to pretend these cultures are given nothing to the world. It's a very peculiar form of self-hatred, self-haranguing that goes on in the West, and I think it's gone on certainly throughout our entire lifetimes, and it's been going on for decades. But I think it has to be identified if it's going to be pushed back against and indeed fought.
Is it that?
You know, Douglas hits that so squarely on the head that with the West, self-flagellating itself basically, all the time in terms of just saying how bad the West is. Here in the United States of America, for example, slavery dominates everything. We're the worst in the world because of slavery. We're the worst in the world because of what we did in World War I and World War II. We're the worst when we dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. America is just the worst. It's that all of the first world countries, the Western European democracies, the United States of America, it's that everything is judged by call our failures when we fell to the lowest. And not all those things that I described am I basically saying were absolutely wrong or not. I mean, slavery, yes. But as far as some of the things like, people were saying that, we were racist because we dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. That absolutely needed to have been done. That was a great decision that changed the course of world history. But the fact of the matter is, no other nations do this. Do you ever see anybody in India basically saying that India is bad? Oh, there might be a few here and there, but not to the extent that you see in the Western European democracies. Do you see that happening anywhere in Russia? People demonstrating, people just coming out like crazy and saying that Russia is absolutely terrible. Its past is terrible. It didn't do anything at all to further human civilization. Do you hear that from any other countries in the world? China, for example? Do you hear people? Well, because of the way that the societies are as well. But even the Chinese people themselves don't self-flagellate themselves as they do in the West to basically that say that, yes, there are things that are bad in all societies that have happened in history. But it is the Western European democracies and the liberals and the leftists and the progressives, those people that hate their country, hate their traditions, hate everything about what their country stands for, the goodness of what their countries did. They never look at that at all. They never do. Anyways, folks, that's what we have on tap for you today. This interview here with Douglas Murray. And I'm your host, Dr. Nasir, with the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show, where I give you my political prescription from my political perspective on what happens when all these things in the world come colliding. Douglas Murray, social media, globalism, colonialism, racism, bigotry, culture, media, religion, social justice, all these things come crashing together. Let's get back to the interview with Douglas with this clip right now.
Because you could look at several revolutionary movements throughout recent history, from the French Revolution to the Bolsheviks, even to communist China, where, of course, you had the Cultural Revolution, where you saw very similar themes of them attacking their past, attacking their traditions. And you say this is self-hatred. Well, these people who are doing this, they probably wouldn't ascribe these traditions to themselves, if you see what I mean. So therefore, they're not really they're hating themselves. They're hating these dead white men or whatever. So perhaps this isn't so peculiar, and it's another revolutionary movement.
Well, it's not peculiar at the end of civilizations. That's true. You could say that it's rather commonplace at the end of civilizations. You're right to draw a link to the Cultural Revolution in China. I'd say the Cultural Revolution in Cambodia as well, which is that it is, yes, an attempt to start again from year zero. By the way, I should stress that, I mean, the examples you give, I mean, these nevertheless are small revolutionary movements that took over massive societies. One of the striking things about the war on the West is that the revolutionary movements have just run through our societies, run through our institutions. So in a country like Britain, you know, most of our public institutions are polluted by anti-Westernism, polluted by the idea that, for instance, anything that's come from so-called dead white men is to be abjured and thrown away, that anything from our past is bad, anyone from anyone else's past is good, that everything we have in our present is bad, everything everyone else has in their present is good and admirable. So yes, it does have some similarities with the revolutionary movements in the past, with the caveat that this is a much bigger than a revolutionary movement in a way, because it's already succeeded in running through our societies so fast.
But it hasn't managed to topple the democratic system. It hasn't led to the murder of thousands or millions of people, as we've seen in those previous terrible examples that I mentioned. So in a way, this is, you know, it's quite slippery and difficult to put your finger on it, which I suppose is why you've written the book.
Yeah, I don't think it's slippery at all. I think that where the movement starts is very easy to identify, and I do. I mean, it basically starts at the point at which people believe that, for instance, the Western nations should have some form of revenge enacted against them. That comes up in the post-colonial period, and there are people who are completely open about that in the post-colonial period. You know, you need basically revolution. You need revenge on the West for colonialism. This has become completely explicit in recent years in the movements in America that seem to think that America never addressed the question of slavery, and think that it must now have an act of historical vengeance carried out on it because of something that happened 200 years ago, it was abolished 200 years ago. And I think that you can see it clearly in what I describe as the so-called anti-racist movements of recent years in particular, which basically believe that, and actually state it as follows, something and quote chapter and verse and do in the book, state that the fact that in the view of the so-called anti-racists, people like Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, and others, that there has been oppression in the past of non-white minorities, which is certainly the case, Nobody will deny it. Racism has been something that has existed in the Western past, as it exists in every civilization, every culture in history. It's a very lamentable and appalling human trait. But these people have decided that because racism existed in the past, you must make up for it by being racist in the present against the people perceived to be the people who carried out the racism in the past. So, for instance, Ibram X. Kendi says the answer to past oppression is present day oppression. The answer to past injustice is present day injustice. What does he mean? He means because black people were undoubtedly prejudiced against in the American past, we must be prejudiced against white people in the present in order to kind of even out the scales. As I say, the moment you get into the realm of revenge is the moment that you see the anti-Westernism very, very clear. It's what I describe in part as a war on white people, which is an insane situation to be in. That anyone would be warring on any racial group because of their racial identities. We would recognize that as being abhorrent in every situation, other than the one that's most prominent at the moment, which is you can say whatever you like about white people. So, for instance, if you and I were two black British commentators and we were talking, I think that if anyone said that's just two black guys, you know, what right do they have to talk? We would say, gosh, that's a very racist thing to say. I would bet that a certain number of responses to the conversation we're even having will be, well, that's just two white guys. As if there's something bad about that, as if there's something bad about being two white guys talking, as if that's sort of unnatural state of affairs and must be stopped. That is a totally commonplace thing today. Because, as I said, there's one permissible form of racism, and that's a form of racism which is we must have vengeance on the white people because the white people did bad things in the past, unlike everyone else. And so I don't think it is slippery, actually. I think it's very specific. I do chapter and verse in the book, partly because I think people need to know what is being said about, and this can't be stressed enough, majority populations. This is not being said. I mean, it would be insane to try to do this to a minority population. It would be insane and wicked to say to a minority population, you're evil because of the color of your skin and you've never produced anything good and you're bad people today and vengeance must be enacted upon you. That'd be a terrible thing to do to any minority group. What an insane thing to try to do to a majority group. And the only way that people can succeed in actually persuading the majorities to go along with this is if that cultural revolutionary movement actually succeeds in browbeating, terrorizing effectively, cowering the majority populations. And I think that they are, this particular cultural revolution is proving very successful at the moment in doing that, so that people are terrified of saying what they think, terrified of identifying what's happening in front of their faces, for fear of the names that they will be called. And as a result, they shut up, keep their heads down, other than perhaps every few years when they're allowed to a ballot box and they make themselves heard in private.
Now, the reason
As Douglas points out, the fact that the majority is now literally scared on both sides of the pond in Western Europe, Great Britain, the United States of America, most Americans, most Britishers, they just want to go about doing their job, go to work, come back home, spend time with family, just, slog through the days, slog through the weeks, able to have, save a little bit, be able to go on a nice vacation, be able to put your kids through college, get your kids off. I mean, that's what most people are just doing. The majority. Middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class. I mean, just want to get through the day. And then if somebody doesn't want to say something, culture war topic, you want to basically say, I've had enough. Some people go out there and scream it at the top of their lungs. Others decide to do it in subtler ways. But the fact of the matter is that you do have a tyranny of the minority. Because the fact is that tyranny of minority, they are controlling, they're wielding those houses of power in government, local, state, federal, at the ministerial level. They're doing it in schools, educational system, from kindergarten all the way to high school. Academia, universities and colleges are all controlled by leftists and leftist thought. in this whole war on the West. Then you've got the media, the alphabet networks. And then you've got the different churches that are out there, the Church of Climatology, right? With Greta Thunberg as their, Saint Greta. And then you've got the transgender, right? The Church of Transgenderism. They're out there trying to change everything and how, words and meanings and um, gender and sex and everything is all, perceived into their delusional thought. And heaven forbid you decide to just say the normal that everybody has been knowing what was what until day before yesterday. But now you say something completely contrary to that, and you're canceled. You lose your job, you lose your place on the sports team. If you happen to be a girl and say, I don't want to compete against that guy. Sorry, honey, you got to compete or you're off the team. We'll get somebody else out here. So all these things happening with this war on the West, it happens, at a local level, then it starts to progress to the state level, it gets to the federal level, to the point where, then policies are written and people are going, what the heck is going on over here? We're being attacked from the north, the south, the east, and the west, and everywhere in between. So it is great that we have people like Douglas Murray and others that are out there, um, that are, fighting the good fight. People on the conservative side, there's so many to mention. I'd be here for another hour, mentioning their names. But I will say one other thing. When he's talking about Ibrahim X. Kendi, who's actually initially was born with the name Henry Rogers and didn't amount to a hill of beans until he changed his name, because Ibrahim X. Kendi sounds so sophisticated. So now all of a sudden he gets the grants, and look what he did. Stole literally tens of millions of dollars for that stupid, idiotic, moronic, retarded, racist, bigoted center at University up at Boston College or Boston University. And people donated tens of millions of dollars to perpetuate this whole theory that because racism was perpetuated on a specific group, blacks in the beginning and other minorities, well, now to fight that racial injustice, you've got to impose racial injustice on those people that you perceive to have imposed the racial injustice on that group prior to that. So you fight racial bigotry with racial bigotry. You fight racial intolerance with racial intolerance. That's Henry Rogers, folks. And I believe right now, because of what happened, I think he'll probably come back somehow, reinvent himself. The left always does this. They always come back. Anyways, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasir Shaikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasir. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel if you think we've earned it. Go ahead, like, share, and follow us. You all know what to do. Check out our video links here and below. My final thought is always, when you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.